Hello and welcome to episode 9 of For What It's Worth, the podcast where I talk to people with interesting hobbies, opinions, and takes on anything and everything. Today, Sebastian Pavlovec, aka DJ Seabass, aka Recruiter, aka Pilot, aka the son of the Dos Equis guy, the most interesting man in the world. When you hear all the different stuff this guy does, it's just mind-blowing. He's incredibly smart, well-spoken, and his career path is quite unconventional. We got to talking about that, the recruiting industry, music, things like the time he spent flying the personal plane of the co-founder of Second Cup, one of Canada's largest coffee chains, and a whole lot more. Hope you enjoy. You can find links to all of Sebastian's music and other exploits in the description. Remember, visit us at FWIWpodcast.net. You can subscribe to the feed there. Check us out on Facebook and Twitter at FWIW Podcasts. You can find us in all your usual podcast places like iTunes, Stitcher, etc. Please subscribe. Please share. I shall be eternally grateful. Enjoy. Good.
Perfect.
So welcome, Sebastian.
Thanks very much for having me on, Adam.
No, thanks for coming on. I like to think of you as sort of like the son of the Dos Equis guy. When I met you and you told me about all the sort of things that you do even outside of your career, which in itself is kind of interesting. You're a recruiter, which, I think is pretty cool. I was like, damn, I wanted to know if you could come on and chat.
Yeah, you know what? I've got one of the most convoluted resumes out there. I haven't seen a resume that has come across with as many career changes in a short amount of time span as I have, and I see a lot of resumes with my job at them.
So take us through it. Tell us about that your background.
About the journey. So I guess starting off, let's call it ending from high school, was trying to figure out what I wanted to do. To be honest, I took all of science classes in high school, so naturally applied through all of the biology, health sciences type programs. Got into most of them, was actually going to go to McMaster to do health sciences, and I think it was my father who whispered in my ear and said, "Hey Sebastian, didn't you want to become a pilot?" And I sort of looked at him and I thought, you know what? Maybe you were whispering when I was a child, but yes, I've looked to the sky and thought, I could possibly do that, but it wasn't a career choice that your counselors would ever sort of guide you towards that path.
Were you like, Dad, could you not have told me this before I spent $500 on applications?
No kidding. Absolutely no kidding. But to be honest, it was his $500, so I think that was okay.
Okay, gotcha.
So I applied, got late acceptance to a place called Confederation College, which is in the metropolis of the North in Thunder Bay, Ontario. And from a kid coming from let's call it the Oakville or the bubble of Oakville, where all my friends were going to Western and going to Queens, going off to Thunder Bay was something that was sort of unheard of at that time. So took the path up north, and I believe they start out with about 85 kids. They graduate 23. The great thing about the program is the government pays for your training, which is quite phenomenal. So as long as you can get through it, get your grades up, and doing all of the flying to a certain standard, sort of the world is your oyster at that point. So I ended up getting my float rating and flying float planes up there as well, which is, by the way, one of the most fun flying that anyone's ever going to do. So
let me stop you. Just so I understand. What is the end goal for most people taking that program? Is it commercial flying?
Absolutely. I think half of them want to do commercial flying, so flying for Air Canada or WestJet or those type of airlines. The other half actually, because a lot of them come from the north, they want to fly bush planes and those kind of fun flying experiences, whether it be the largest float plane that's out there, or they fly for the Ministry of Environment, flying those big water bombers.
I see. I assume there's a lot of work for that. I mean, that's probably a very important mode of transportation up there. So there's work to be had.
Definitely. So I did that for the better part of 2.5 years up there to get my commercial license. And to be honest, you come out of there with about 200 hours of flight training, which is basically a license to learn. Nobody in their right mind is going to hire you to fly an airplane at 200 hours, unless arguably you're in India, which is kind of frightening. But they have a little bit of a different standard over there. So I came back to Toronto with, have my commercial license, thinking I'm a maverick in all the bars, but really, nobody's going to hire me. So I decided to go and fly skydivers actually for a couple of summers just to get my hours up. And while I was doing that, I was doing that on the weekends. And during the week, I was actually working at Toronto Pearson Airport, fueling airplanes and towing airplanes around, just to be part of the aviation community and hopefully speak to someone who would end up giving me the opportunity to fly. And that's when I met, arguably, let's call it my second father / mentor, Frank O'Day, who's the gentleman who started Second Cup, the coffee company. He had his own airplane. One day he flew in. Of course, I didn't know who he was, but people were taking pictures of him. I walked up to him and I said, listen, why are people taking pictures of you? I'm sorry, I don't recognize you. He said, oh, never worry about that. Let's just talk about the airplane. Talked about the airplane for a while. He understood that I knew a lot about it. Talked to him, told him that I was, a freshly minted commercial pilot. And he said, listen, when I fly to the States and fly to a bunch of other places that I don't want to do flight plans and do the customs for, I normally take another pilot with me. So he said, would you be interested in that? And of course, I'm jumping with joy on the inside, but trying not to show that on the outside.
Yeah, staying cool as a cucumber.
Trying to. I think it was minus 30 outside, so I think underneath all the clothing that I was wearing, I don't think you could see my rosy cheeks at that point.
Uh-huh.
But so I think it was 3 weeks later when he called me, actually, because they were doing a flight to Naples, Florida with his family and wanted me to do all the flight planning for it. So this was, completely... I wasn't given a full-time position, but this was sort of a contract work just at this time. As
a secondary pilot? Is that how it worked?
As a secondary pilot. So I was flying co-pilot, so on the right seat.
Mm-hmm.
So I did all the flight plans, basically everything leading up to starting the engines. So he would basically fly the trip. I would do all the radios, do all the navigation, basically all of the hard work. I'm not going to lie, Adam.
He was flying it himself.
He was flying it himself,
mm-hmm.
Yep. And on our way down to Naples, Florida, his wife and kids wanted to stop off at different places in order to get different things, to get the true experience of being able to fly your own airplane down in Naples. So because of all these stops along the way, I missed my commercial flight back to Canada about 3 times.
Oh my.
And at that point, I think it was his wife literally just turned to Frank and said, listen, let's just get Sebastian to stay with us for the week down here. Literally he's missed 3 flights. I'm sure he can sort of cancel his workout on the ramp at Toronto Pearson for a week, and I'm sure he'd want to spend a week over in Naples, Florida at this point.
This was your first flight with them?
It was my first flight.
This is crazy. That's amazing.
Yeah, it's pretty neat. So at the end of the week spending it with them, Nancy actually, so I guess attribute Nancy to some of the success I've had with Frank, is that she was the one who actually made Frank hire me full time. So because she didn't want her husband flying every day by himself. I think he was about 63 or 65 at the time. Mm-hmm. So health was never a concern, but it's always in the back of your mind, having 2 pilots is always going to be safer. So basically, I think it was a week later, I moved to Ottawa, and we started flying the airplane every day back and forth from Ottawa to Toronto and around the States because he did inspirational speaking. Mm-hmm. He's one of the gentlemen who's earned the Order of Canada. Does speeches because he was a homeless guy on the streets of Toronto and Montreal. Really turned his life around and started the Second Cup franchise, and amongst another of other businesses as well.
Mm-hmm. So this is incredible. So at this point, not only are you banking your hours, your flight hours, but you're getting to hang with an amazing entrepreneur.
Yeah,
so you're learning in all sorts of different ways. Go on, sorry.
Yeah, no, I was going to say, it's probably the best experience I ever had because, yes, I was doing the flying, which I absolutely loved. But later on in my life, I realized what I was doing in the office is what I truly loved as well, and it took up more of my time. So, yes, we were flying every day from Ottawa to Toronto. But then once I was in Toronto, I basically had a front row seat to an executive and all of his meetings. So that learning for me was better than any of the MBA that I ever embarked on afterwards.
And so were you actively assisting him in the office as well?
I was, correct. Yeah.
So he was aware of your skills were more than just flying. You also had the business skills that he could then, benefit from.
Yeah, I think what he once said was, Sebastian, get out of flying, go into business. When boys grow up, they put away their toys. And I looked over at him and I said, Frank, for goodness sake, you're flying an airplane, so you're full of it.
Right.
So to be honest, it sort of festered with me, and I'm thinking, geez, at some point I'd like to fly a bigger airplane. So one day I turned to him and I said, Frank, you know what? I appreciate everything you've ever done for me. I think flying is the path. And if I'm going to do that, I'm grateful for all the hours that I've got in this airplane, but I've got to fly something bigger if I'm going to progress into something else. He told me, Sebastian, just looked at me, he said, you know what, you'll be back. And, I told him, okay, well, I need to find the path out on my own. So I flew bigger airplanes for a company called Image Air Charter, which basically is, let's just say, Adam, you had an airplane, you purchased one, but of course you're not going to fly it every day, unless you're Warren Buffett. So you basically would send your plane to our company in order to fly it while you're not using it, so it offsets the cost. So I was flying different people, every week, every month, whatever it was for Image Air. And what I realized during that time was, I'd be flying to Naples, Florida, but I'd be there for a week, and I'd be twiddling my thumbs. And you know what? Naples, Florida is Naples, Florida, but after a week or 2 or 3 or 5 times, it all seems the same.
And these are also other business figures, sort of on the same level as your previous experience.
Correct. Yeah, we had some business key business players during Toronto Film Festival. We had some key players flying in airplanes, some bigger than the one that I was flying, but mostly I would say key players in the business world were the people I was flying. Mm-hmm. So most I wouldn't have recognized at that time, but going back, I probably now would have. And
now at this stage, you are in the actual pilot role. You're no longer co-pilot.
Correct. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. In fact, Frank transferred me over to captain on his airplane, got me all the training necessary in order to do that. And so in my next role with Image Air, I was doing the same.
Wow. But something's not sitting 100%. You say you're there, you're twiddling your thumbs.
Yeah. And to be honest, when flying your airplane, you better love the guy you're flying with, because you're spending every waking moment with them, whether it be breakfast, lunch, dinners, overnights. Not in the same hotel room, of course, but you're spending your life with this other individual. And if you guys aren't gelling exactly the way it needs to happen, not like a best friend, but at least a professional relationship, you're not going to have the greatest of times. So at that point, I thought, geez, you know what? I might as well call Frank, of course, being the mentor of my life. Asked him, what should I be doing? Of course, spoke to my parents as well. And my parents have always been an advocate for whatever I wanted to get into. So apparently, health sciences was not something they wanted me to get into for whatever reason. Mm-hmm. But they told me, you know what? Then go back to school, learn something new. Frank always says I should have got into business, so I went back and did my MBA. Thankfully, I got a glowing letter of recommendation from him, which I'm sure helped out in the admissions process, and embarked on that. And that was an 18-month journey over on Vancouver Island, believe it or not.
So, but did you, at that stage, was that passion just not as strong anymore? Because what you described up to this point was a real love for what you were doing and a sort of a dream since you were a kid. But here you are sort of saying, oh, well, perhaps this isn't it.
You know what? It's the passion is still there. The passion is there for takeoff and landing. Mm-hmm. The passion isn't there for being in cruise and for the, let's call it a natural schedule that you have. I always had to be within 2 hours of the airport. So I quickly realized that, when all my friends said, hey, do you want to go to this concert? That's 3 weeks ahead in time. I always said, listen, would love to get a ticket, but don't know if I'm going to be able to show up. Or, God forbid you want to have a beer. Well, you always need to be within 2 hours of the airport. So that was a factor as well. So whenever you wanted to have a drink, you'd be calling into to flight control, I guess, and saying, listen, I'm off duty. So you can imagine how many of those pilots were doing that on a regular basis.
And what about moving on to even bigger planes, flying commercially for big airlines, stuff like that?
Yeah, I would say that probably interests me less than staying in the corporate route. Mm-hmm. I'd say for me at that time when I was at Image Air, my let's call it dream job would have been to be flying a Gulfstream 500 or a G5, like all of these. You probably heard it in the songs nowadays, or so fly like a G6.
The rappers have told me about it, yes.
The rappers always love the opulence of all of these things, but in essence, I'm sure none of them really could afford a $60 million airplane. And then, of course, it's the maintenance and the gas that goes into it afterwards, which is astronomical. Mm-hmm. In fact, Frank, who owned his airplane, also owned, I think, 3 or 4 horses, which his kids were using for jumping and show jumping. Mm-hmm. And he said, Sebastian, if you think airplanes are expensive, he's like, never purchase anything in your life, promise me, that eats and shits while you sleep. It's like that is something that will outrun an airplane any day of the week.
Oh my gosh.
So, yeah, no, fun guy.
Oh my, that's amazing. And so now you've sort of taken a different route.
I have.
You went into business, you got your MBA.
Yep.
And there you go. Even in the MBA, you sort of have to say to yourself, well, what path is next, right? Because there's all these different options.
Exactly. And you know what? The end of my MBA versus the end of my, getting my commercial license, I look at it the same way. Complete license to learn. Nobody gives you instant credibility, whether you have a commercial pilot's license getting into piloting or having an MBA going into business. You need the experience. So at the end of my MBA, I chose a program that had a mandatory internship, which is fantastic because that would at least give me a sort of foot in the door or a little bit of, I guess, tiny bit of experience into the world before I could really go off and figure out what I wanted to do. So my first, I guess, business experience was at a company called the Enterprise Performance Group, which is a management consulting company which services the mortgage industry, real estate industry, and logistics primarily. And the owner of that company, of course it's all related, was the executive coach to Frank. So that was my in with this company, which was fantastic. But of course, this guy, even understanding that I knew Frank, didn't give me a leg up whatsoever. I had to earn my way no matter what the situation. So he thought, just based on where I've come from, my personality, my attitude, that I should start getting into sales. So he said, Sebastian, for your internship, we're going to figure out if you're decent at sales. And if you are, we're going to figure out how to create a sales department. And that's what your general project is going to be on. So with all of that research done, I was basically cold calling, putting together scripts and getting one-on-one coaching with Wayne, who was my boss at the time. And every time something would go wrong at him, he'd be yelling, Sebastian, and I'd run into his office and we'd run through that exact call, how it all played out, what the objections were, how to handle them. You'll never get a better sales experience than that.
Trial by fire.
Yeah, trial by fire, baptism by fire, whatever you want to call it. The best way to learn. Books can only do so much. So I was successful at that role. I was in that role for about 5 or 6 months, and then was, I guess, promoted, if you want to call it that, to a director of sales. Of course, being in business for 6 months, being a director of sales, and having a team underneath you, had no idea how to manage. So that was an interesting position as well.
And so now again, you've really succeeded fairly quickly again in something that you decided to do.
Yep.
But still, this is not the end of the journey.
No, it wasn't enough again, Adam, which is a problem, I guess, or a little spice of life for me. And it's now actually when I'm running through this with you, Adam, because I haven't done it sort of from back page to front page or front to back, actually, I should say. The things are sort of coming up. But it was Frank who whispered in my ear again and had an entrepreneurial company that he was starting, or he had funded, called YPIT, which is Young Professionals IT. And what the company did was it provided transcription services to companies. So in the very simplistic form, it would be data entry. So let's just say a company like Sun Life had a bunch of these, let's call them surveys that they've sent out through paper, and they get them back. And now what? We've got thousands of these things that needed to be inputted into a system so that they can actually be used and, basically, put into graphs and sort of have all the data done. So they would use a company like ours to get all that done. And so what we would do is use high school and university kids, kids that normally wouldn't have access to a job sort of on a flexible. So we call it an elastic workforce on a project basis. So if you wanted to work from your dorm room at $10 an hour, plus we put another $2 or $3 an hour into an education savings fund, you would have access to our program to do data entry. So on one side of the screen, you'd have the survey. The other side of the screen, you'd have the data to be entered in. It'd be in a format that you couldn't understand where the data would have come from. So confidentiality was never an issue, and away you go. Problem was we were a cost leader for a while, but we were getting undercut by outsourcing to companies like India. Mm-hmm. So at that point, I was in that company for about a year. Was doing business development for them and helping with all, believe it or not, even the software side of it, which gave me, let's call it my first foray into an entrepreneurial type environment. So I was working with 2 or 3 other guys who are based in Ottawa. I was based in Toronto, which is pretty exciting. Not going to lie, it's a totally different world. You're working 80-hour work weeks, maybe longer sometimes. because that dream is in sight. You really, really want to make sure it comes to fruition.
And you're growing something from scratch.
From scratch.
Mm.
Exactly. So I knew that being an entrepreneur in my own right is something that I wanted to do. Even after that. So I was actually recruited into recruiting from that role through one of my previous colleagues who I work with at the Enterprise Performance Group. She was a partner over there. She moved out west to Vancouver. And my current boss, Peter Reek, was actually at a function over in Vancouver, met up with Carla, who I used to work with. Peter Reek said he was thinking about expanding to Toronto. He was going to go out there for interviews. And Carla said, well, you know what? I know a great guy out there you need to meet if you're thinking about doing that. A guy who works great independently, and she's seen what I've done on the sales side. So that's how I got introduced to my current employer.
Was that at the core? Is that at the core of a good recruiter? The knack for the sales side of things?
Yeah, I would say it's 95% of recruiting is sales, and I don't mean that in the sleazy aspect. I just mean you always need to be influencing. You need to always understand. Everybody has their own motivations for doing things, and I think when you think about if you think about everybody's motivations the same way, whether it be money, whether it be flexibility. I think you'd be completely wrong to sort of typecast people into these roles. Listening is the biggest thing you could ever do successfully in sales, and being inquisitive in people's lives and understanding where they are in their life is something that makes a good recruiter. Mm-hmm. And obviously being able to identify and remember all of these people and have a system set up so that you can quickly identify these people as well is something that you need for success.
Is there a point where, in the recruiting journey, you certainly, at the beginning, you're pure selling. I mean, you're selling a candidate to the employer, you're selling the employer to the candidate. Is there a point, though, where you are unable to influence things any further once, say a potential employee has met the employer? At that stage of the game, do you still have the ability to influence that?
100%. Well, sorry, I should say 100%. You are correct in assuming that there's only so much you can do. There's two analogies I like to use, Adam. One is recruitment is like riding a motorcycle versus riding a horse. When you hit the throttle on a motorcycle, you know exactly what it's going to do. It's going to fire off the line and everything's going to go great. Well, a horse, it could do exactly what you want it to do. It could gallop away. It could also buck you off. It could also go sideways. That is kind of like recruiting. Second analogy I like to use is, let's just say, Adam, I'm going to sell you 400 iPhones. Well, recruiting is the only business in the world where if your product doesn't want to go, the sale's over. I don't have to convince an iPhone that it wants to go in your pocket, but I need to convince a candidate that position is the right fit for it. So it's a very interesting business, and it's almost like real estate, where you have the buyers and the seller mentality, and you're trying to manage both sides the best way you can. The thing is with recruiters, sort of typecasting or fitting people into positions that they're not perfectly a fit for is never going to work out long term. It may work out short term, but that's why recruiters give guarantees where we have to repeat searches if things don't work out in 3 or 6 months or whatever it is. And your credibility and relationships are going to be tarnished very, very quickly if that's the case. So being true and being honest, just like any other position, is something that we really, really need to work on.
To what extent do you try and interpret a potential candidate's background and abilities outside of the box of the job description that the employer may have devised or you may have helped them devise?
Yeah, so we see them in a different light, I would say. Let's just say you came to me for a job, Adam. Obviously, I have your best interest at heart, so you're going to open up to me a little more than you probably would open up to a potential employer. Would you agree?
Yeah, I think that's a fair assessment.
Yeah. Like you would try to keep me at bay to a certain extent, not wanting me to know possibly absolutely everything. But at the end of the day, if I can get you to trust me and get you to give me as much information as absolutely possible and get you to understand that however much information you can give me, I can sort of present it in a certain way to a client. I think I build a level of trust with individuals. And obviously, I dig deep on extracurriculars. I dig deep on motivations outside of the job description. The job description, is something I believe that is out there. You know, you need 3 to 5 years of sales experience. Well, what does that really mean? Does that mean direct sales experience that relates to that position? Does that mean, you know, you worked at a lemonade stand for 3 years before coming in? There are all of these things that I believe job descriptions don't really do properly, and I think they're just there as an easy way to scan resumes and to sort of delete them or take them off the pile. I don't believe it's the best way to hire individuals, to be honest.
That's very interesting. Personally, I'm in a situation where I'm speaking to a lot of recruiters, looking for that next challenge, and it's very interesting because there are a lot of recruiters out there that very much don't stray too far from the job description. Would you say that it is simpler? It makes things faster if a recruiter does that, because they don't want to sort of have to try and fit a round peg into a square hole with an employer who's like, nope, this is what I want, this is my job description.
Absolutely. And I think what it does, it makes it super, super easy for a recruiter. Let's just say you have 3 years in sales for software as a service companies, and you have 2 years of marketing for, you know, a B2B company. You can literally just write that to an employer and just say, listen, Kate, 3 years of this, 2 years of this is your right candidate. But what a lot of employers don't do is they don't list competencies, and they don't take a 30,000 foot view of the individual. It's just strictly, you know, having these qualifications are one piece of it, but what a resume doesn't tell you is exactly who the person's all about. And I understand that's what the interview process is for, and having screenings. But I believe recruiters cut the time probably into about a quarter, because they shortlist candidates for you. So arguably that's what they're saving you in the end, is time, if you do have a proper recruiter on your team who can then screen appropriately at that point.
Mm-hmm. You know, it seems to me like recruiters often get a bad rap. And you know, it must, you know, a lot of it is volume, and I get that, but you know, what are your thoughts on that?
My thoughts, you know, only being in recruiting for 2 years, but my thoughts are the fact that a lot of recruiters do work on what's called contingency. And what that means, Adam, is that, let's just say you're an employer and you've hired Sebastian, myself, to find you a sales guy. Well, Adam, you're only going to pay me if I find you the person that you're actually going to hire. And I would say 90% of recruiting, arguably, well, especially on the sales side, is done on this basis. And you might not even just reach out to Sebastian. You might reach out to recruiting firm 1, recruiting firm 5, recruiting firm 8, whatever the case may be. You may have 5 different companies working on this one role for you. And what does that do? It makes sure that each one of those firms are sending you about 50 candidates as quickly as they possibly can. And very, very quickly it becomes like World War I or World War II, where everyone is bombarding your inbox with arguably unqualified resumes, because now it's speed to market versus quality.
Right.
So that's the industry needs to change, where companies, if they trust the recruiter, and to be honest, if people do enough due diligence in order to sign a contract, they should be arguably okay with the level of service that they're going to get.
Because
right?
It's more about, it should be about quality as opposed to quantity.
You got it. And right now, a lot of the times, a lot of firms out there are all about this volume basis. So let's slap as many resumes as we possibly can, and then candidates aren't vetted properly. So
that's interesting. I've never considered that it could it could be a result of the way the employer is setting it up, and setting up that competition between, say, several firms or several recruiters.
Yeah, and it's the way recruiters are setting it up too, because it's an easier sale. If I come to you, Adam, and I say, listen, you know, I'm Joe Schmo from off the block. I've got the best sales guys in my database. Listen, sign this contract, and you know, no harm, no foul if you don't hire my guys, but I'm gonna send them all to you. Really, at the end of the day, all the loss is your time at this point.
Mm-hmm. But this is where I wonder, where do you find the time, or how is it beneficial for you to try and actually, you know, dig deeper than that job description?
You got it. And I think that comes with the right relationships with your clients. When they've gone through all of this for a few years, working with contingency recruiters, a lot of them will just understand, and they'll give you a chance. They'll give you 3 or 4 resumes. At that point, they'll stop speaking to you if they're not the resumes that they want to see, or the type of people they want to see. Mm-hmm. And I think that's totally justified.
Do they give you enough time to sort of give them a backstory, to sit down with you or talk to you about what it is they're looking for, those intangibles, those things that could help maybe, you know, look for a more well-rounded person?
Yeah, I can only speak to to my experience at Smart Savvy, our process is such that we don't start a search unless we go to the office of a client and sit down with them and do a proper intake, is what we call it. So I'm not sure if the other firms are doing it, but recruitment in general, if it's done the way that we're doing it, we have to go in and do it. In fact, I was just at a company today doing that. And I think personally, you need to be at the office. You need to understand the culture, because everybody always explains culture that everything is so collaborative. The energy here is great. With it's the work hard, play hard model. We all go out afterwards for beers, and then you get there and you can hear a pin drop, and there's 5 or 8 people missing out of a 12-person office, and I'm thinking like all these things. Everyone paints a nice rosy picture. In fact, every candidate that comes in paints a nice rosy picture, and we call ourselves detectives because we sniff out the pretenders, is what we do on a daily basis.
On both sides.
On both sides, you got it.
What do you like most about recruiting?
To be honest, I love that aspect of it. I wouldn't say I love catching people in a lie, but I love asking questions. I love being the inquisitive type, and understanding where there is a hole and making the individual find that hole at the end of the day, finding it themselves. Because what I truly believe is that if I'm able to find that hole in a half-hour meeting, it's not going to do them any good when they're actually at an interview at the company. So if I can understand, listen, was that just a hole that was missed? Was it something that they're not trying to tell me for whatever reason? It's going to help them in the future regardless. So I'm not the one to say, listen, that doesn't make sense. I just keep asking questions until they realize at the end of the day, okay, I need to elaborate on this, or shoot, he actually caught me in something.
Who knows? Maybe detective work is in your future.
Hey, I've switched careers enough, but to be honest, I hate being the jack of all trades. I want to be the master at something. So that's why I've got my feet sort of firmly planted, both feet in this career at this point.
This is what you're betting on right now.
I am.
Interesting.
If I was a betting man, I'd do it, Adam.
Okay, well, listen, I'm not going to say I don't believe you, but your history seems to indicate that you may, things may happen differently. But hey, the world needs good recruiters. I think, again, having worked with a lot of people are well-intentioned. It's just for a candidate, you do quickly get that sense, that sort of quantity issue. You do start to feel like a commodity a little bit.
Yep.
So I'm glad that you have that take on it. It's amazing. What would you say is most challenging about the world?
Most challenging of recruiting?
Yeah.
It's a great question. Besides the fact that everybody has their own life, so you're asking for something that they're not currently thinking about. So let's just say I'm reaching out to a candidate about an opportunity. Most people have their heads down. They're doing a great job at their current company. And I'm basically somebody off to the side saying, listen, there might be something else better for you over here. It's almost like asking someone, arguably, Adam, to break up with their girlfriend because I've got this show model on the side that I'd love to show them if they're interested. And you know what? Everybody has their loyalty. And I hate to use the analogy of being disloyal and looking at opportunities, but that's what we're doing at the end of the day.
We're both going to get in trouble for this.
Yeah, absolutely. You know what? My girlfriend's in the other room and the door's closed. Thank goodness. Yeah.
It's not like this is going to be posted on the internet or anything.
No, of course not. Of course not.
But that, there must. What would you say the split is? So there are some who are very loyal and very happy, but then there are others who, especially for the right price, and those who don't mind change and sort of maybe live off a little bit of chaos.
Yeah,
they must enjoy your calls.
Yeah, I think, and what's funny? It's a great question. You mentioned this is that some of the most successful people that I speak with, the people who I think arguably I would never have the time for me, those are the individuals that always reach out. Because at the end of the day, what am I giving them? I'm giving them free market research on what the market is bearing for someone with their position, their amount of experience. And if nothing else, that's obviously worth 10 or 15 minutes of their time.
Yeah, it's always nice to be wanted.
Absolutely. And times have changed. Gone are the days where you stay with a company for 20 or 30 years. Get your pension and run away. Change is something obviously that's always around us. I'm not saying you need to be jumping every day like the Dos Equis man like I have, but you always need to be understanding what change is happening in the market and where the potential next steps are. It's almost like a chess game.
No, that's very interesting. So, well, listen, I hope it I hope it gives you what you're looking for. We've all been there. I mean, quarter life crisis, midlife crisis. People don't know what they want to do with themselves, but
Hey, I'm turning 30 next year, so maybe I'll have another crisis at that point.
so you technically should have already passed the quarter life thing.
I should.
So now, you are the Dos Equis guy, and so besides all this great stuff, you're also doing something else on the side, which is DJing. So how the hell do you find the time, and two, like, where does that start, and how do you get into that? Take me through that, because we totally sort of omitted that in your story.
Yeah, see things that we skip, just like how people skip stuff on a job interview for me. So that all started when I was doing my MBA, and that being I had never been in business at that point, so it was as you can probably understand, a little bit stressful at that time. Mm-hmm. So every Friday, all of us would be hanging out, and I mean all of us, people in residence, would all be hanging out, and we'd be listening to music. And I thought, it'd be kind of fun to do something with this time. So with all that research done, I bought a little DJ mixer and started mixing. And very, very quickly on the Friday, I would say a quarter of the university would be around our college area dorms, hanging out, listening to music, with me DJing. So I was known, obviously, as, if you want to call this, DJ Seabass for for the whole Sebastian Seabass thing. Yeah. So quickly over in Vancouver Island, someone from the bar community was there and said, "Listen, you do this really, really well. Why don't you start DJing in one of the clubs over in Nanaimo?" So with all that research done at the club scene and how this all happened, I started doing that almost every Saturday while I was in school as well. I wouldn't say it supplemented the income for doing my MBA, but at least I wasn't spending money during those evenings.
Keeping yourself out of trouble on weekends.
You got it.
And so were you always into electronic music?
You know what? It probably started around that time.
Really?
Yeah. It was just all around. I think, I'm not sure if it was because it was out west first, but that sort of music, that genre of music, really sort of took off out there, and I just found a love for it very, very quickly.
It's funny because in my experience, it's a genre that either people have sort of slowly gotten into when they were younger,
yep,
or they just dislike and they'll never listen to it. So it's kind of interesting. You're one of the first people I've ever heard say that they got into that at that stage of their life.
Yeah. And arguably, if my parents ever heard it, which arguably they have many, many times because they have no choice back in the day because of how loud the speakers were. But, it's a type of music where people would look at it and go, "Oh my goodness, is this heavy metal? Is this the new death metal, heavy metal, whatever it was?" Mm-hmm. That would seem sort of satanic in nature. But it's amazing how it's sort of music to my ears, at least right now.
And so you're a solo at that point.
I was solo and then moved back to Toronto. After doing the MBA, and at that point, I wanted to keep it going. I wanted to keep playing in clubs. And one of my best friends, Michael Cisneros, we sort of got together and we figured, if we're going to play in bigger clubs together, it'd be awesome to have somebody right next to you. So if things don't go well, we can sort of just put our arms around each other and just sort of share in the burden or share in the success. So we thought, geez, we've got to come up with a name for this duo group. And the name that we ended up coming up with, well, I guess I should preface with the fact that we tried to find something, I guess, that was sort of common between our lives. So he was a big tennis guy, got a scholarship for the States to go down and play tennis. So we're thinking, okay, tennis, whatever it is, we're thinking, okay, tennis ace. And all of a sudden, when that came out of it, we're thinking, okay, but there's also flying aces, like back in the war. So that's how Aces was born, was through those two names sort of being brought together.
Got it. So why don't we take a listen to Terror Squad, Still Getting It.
still getting it.
Fucking zombie.
So you told me this is your most listened to track.
It is.
So when did you guys create this track, and how did it get the popularity that it did?
Yeah, so we started getting a SoundCloud page up. That was before SoundCloud started taking down a lot of what they call bootlegs. So whenever you started mashing a bunch of songs together, if you didn't actually create all of the sounds yourself, SoundCloud started taking them down. Now this song was different enough that it still stayed up there, which is incredible. And EDM Tunes, I believe, is the entity that came on and started commenting on it. And as soon as they were commenting on it, they loved it, and they posted it on their own page, which is, it's a major page within the electronic dance community, or electronic dance music. So that's where the whole EDM Tunes comes from. Mm-hmm. And as soon as it was posted on there, actually I was with Michael at the time, my DJ partner, and all of a sudden we started getting ding, 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 ding on our phone. And geez, at that point we thought we were famous. We thought we were dropping our jobs at the time, and geez, we're just going to tour around. So it's good I didn't put my letter of resignation in for my job at the time. But anyways, it was a whole heck of a lot of fun.
Where are you for a full-time job at that point?
Where was I? I believe, I was at Young Professionals IT, so I was doing the entrepreneurial stint at that time.
Okay. And you guys created this song in the studio. This wasn't... did this have anything to do with your live gigs at the time?
This, believe it or not, yes, this did have to do with live gigs. So the thing with, let's call them amateur DJs, because that's really what we are, Adam. I like to say that we're professional, but unless you're playing in the large festivals where you have 30,000 people, we're just going to call ourselves amateurs. So we need to cater our music towards the audience. So let's just say you saw us come and play, Adam. We would need to tailor our music for that specific club. Mm-hmm. so that we're in line with the type of, let's call it ambience or whatever they're trying to create for an event that night. And we played at one of the largest clubs actually in Toronto, which is sort of a check off the bucket list for us. It was called The Government. Are you familiar with that?
I am.
Yeah, so they've since torn it down and all of the sins that went along with that place. But we ended up getting to play at that venue, and it was one of these big, let's call it hype nights where lots of energy in the music. And at this point, we didn't have that kind of music. So we ended up creating this specifically for that night. And it was a major hit, and I'm so happy that we did it.
Were you able to keep playing it at other gigs after that?
Absolutely, just not to the same extent or for as long, because it's a little too intense for most of the places we play at now.
Okay, interesting. So you've kept that up this whole time?
Yeah, we sort of took a hiatus for maybe 3 or 4 months, and I was realizing something was missing from my life. I need some extracurricular activity, whether it's flying airplanes, buzzing around the CN Tower in a Cessna 172, or jumping up and down in a club. I think I'm a secret adrenaline junkie.
Right, because you're still, and that's the other thing we didn't touch on, that you're still flying.
Still flying, yeah.
Do you have your own plane, or you rent? How does it work?
Yeah. So you know what? It's not as expensive as everyone thinks, Adam. You can go to Burlington Flight Club right now, where I'm a member. As long as you're a member, you can go and rent a plane right now for about $180 an hour, maybe even less, maybe $170 an hour. That includes fuel, that includes insurance, and you can take 4 people or 5 people if you really shove them in there for an hour.
Wow.
So yeah,
that is affordable. Considering I would have thought, okay, 170 plus fees plus fuel, this and that, but okay.
Exactly. So when you start purchasing an airplane and then paying for maintenance and paying for all of that, just renting a plane and knowing that, yes, you'd have to figure out if it's properly maintained, but most of these flight clubs do an exceptional job because they have lots of students that are flying, and students really take a toll on airplanes, so they need to make sure that all the parts are up to date.
That is crazy stuff. So how important would you say, I got to thinking a lot about this recently, how important are those, those hobbies, those interests outside of your career?
Arguably more important than your career, because, everybody says, pick a position or pick a job for your future that doesn't feel like a job, and, you're not working every day, but you're just living. Well, I agree to a certain extent, but, if bungee jumping was my thing, arguably I could be, I guess, a bungee jump specialist. But there are other passions. I believe everybody has, I would say 5 or 10 passions of theirs, and you can't make all of those a job. So as long as your extracurriculars make you happy and keep you, let's call it, keep the gas tank full. Yes, your day job should make you equally as happy, but everybody needs something on the side.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's so true. It helps, de-stress. It helps keep you interested and motivated, I think, which spills over into your career.
It does.
I would think. Do you find that now, going back to your profession in recruiting, do you find that makes for better candidates? Those that have those interests outside of work, that and this especially diverse ones, like say the ones you named?
Listen, I think when you talk about hobbies that absolutely need a regimented routine. So let's just say you see people that are doing the Ride to Conquer Cancer every year, which is a 250, 300 kilometer, I guess maybe it's 220 kilometer bike ride, and these people that need to constantly train. Well, that training does something to your brain, and what it does is it keeps you in line. So let's just say you have deadlines to be done. Well, it decreases your chances of procrastination because your body and your mind and health are all within a certain uniform focus. So a lot of these positions, where jumping out of an airplane, something I could have done all summer, when I was flying these planes around, that's not something that's probably going to translate great into a position, but it shows that you're willing to take risks and calculated risks at that. Depending on the position that I'm getting somebody in for, that might come across as fantastic. It all depends on really how you, I guess, package up somebody's experience. If you want somebody who's just going to sit at a desk, crunch numbers, and be completely risk averse, well, maybe a bungee jumper is probably not someone that you'd want to be part of the company. But it's funny because a lot of those people who are risk averse at work and are crunch numbers are the craziest ones outside of work. So everybody's different, and I love to hone in on what makes people tick. Mm-hmm.
That's so interesting. I did want to ask one more thing about ACES. Do you imagine that ever growing or going beyond the label that you sort of attached to, which was amateur DJs?
You know what? I would love it to. I would absolutely love it to. The problem is, my friend and I who do this aren't absolutely musically inclined. You know what? I grew up playing guitar a little bit here and there. Never grew up playing piano, and most of these songs are made with a piano or keyboard and different synthesizers. So we would almost need somebody else, maybe a trio, call ourselves the Three Musketeers or something, in order to get this done to the full potential. And that's what a lot of DJs do nowadays. They have what's called a ghost producer, somebody producing the music, and then they have a figurehead who's out there actually entertaining the crowds and actually there on site doing the DJing and the mixing.
So who are your favorite artists right now?
Number one, hands down, is Armin van Buuren. He's now come on the radio, so people now have heard of him over here in North America. But he's been a trance god over in Europe for many, many years. And he has his State of Trance 750 coming up in January. In fact, you should join me, Adam, in that celebration.
You know what? I think I might take you up on it.
I like it.
I'm a big fan of electronica. I strayed toward the more high beats per minute stuff.
Yep, that's your Armin stuff.
I gotta look up. I gotta sort of listen to more of his stuff. He's come sort of across my radar. Can you recommend good ways of discovering electronica? I always say this. I think it's come up in a few other episodes that I feel like discovering music was easier when I was younger. I don't know, at the time growing up, chatting with people on the web was much more prevalent, and then a buddy would send you a track or somebody would say this or that. Nowadays I scroll through my social media feeds, and here and there people will post music, but often the most of the time they don't. How do you discover new stuff?
Yeah, great question, Adam. And to be honest, a year ago I had no idea. But very quickly, when you start DJing and you need new music and you want the same, let's say, genre and sound of music, but you need obviously different tracks, finding those tracks is very difficult. Number one for me has been going through podcasts. And the podcasts nowadays are set up so whenever a song's playing, the actual song track name and the artist is right there in your face. So it's not like you're having to Shazam the music and figure out, oh, that sounds great, which one is it? It's right there in your face. And you could just take a screenshot to download later.
Okay. That's great. And so just Googling around for good podcasts in the genre that interests you. Exactly.
For me, the Above and Beyond podcast, obviously Armin's A State of Trance podcast, and Juna Deep podcast, and Gareth Emery's podcast are probably my top hits to find some great music, because they span the genres actually quite well, especially the Gareth Emery one.
That's awesome. And for those listening, I'm going to get all those links in the description of this episode so that you can check that out, as well as Ace's links so that you can check them out as well.
Thanks, Adam. Appreciate it.
Hey, listen, thank you. This was really, really cool. I totally want to check out more of the music. Let me know when some shows are coming up. Do you have any shows right now that you want to share with people?
That's a phenomenal question. We might have one in 2 weeks, but I will keep you posted, and I'll get you a link to put up on your page if you could.
I will for sure. Is there any sort of permanent spot that people can check back to?
Check back to our SoundCloud, and we also have a Facebook group that we post all of our up-to-date stuff.
Okay, cool. All that I'm going to include all that stuff in the description so that people can keep track. And you heard it. Savvy is the name. I think I've worked with you guys. I think you guys are great in terms of recruiting, and I love everything you've said. It's so much about the philosophy, because clearly, the world and this industry is a fast-paced environment, and if you got people that are thinking about this stuff, then you're way better off working with people like that. So, listen, thank you so much for coming on tonight. All the best in your endeavors, and maybe we should take bets here on whether you're actually going to stick to this or what'll be next on the great adventure.
We should put it to the crowd, but I'm giving this at least another 5 years. 5 years of recruiting. And at that point,
I'm going to say that hearing about your knack and what was interesting is throughout your story, when the idea of entrepreneurship came up, I think you spoke really highly of it. So I'm going to say that maybe this is something that you'll want to spin off into your own sort of business.
Dun, dun, dun.
That's my prediction. But we'll check back in a few years. So 5 years. Okay, so it's the 1st of December 2015. So 2020, we're going to check back. Maybe we should do a follow-up episode at that point.
I can't wait to be back on the show then.
I'm going to put it in my calendar, and then in 5 years we'll get a little ding, and we'll see what we can do.
If I'm an international DJ, it'll be even a better program.
Who knows if you'll even give me the time of day at that point.
Hey, I always remember where I came from, and this podcast has been fantastic. I've listened to some of your other ones. You've done a great job.
Thank you, sir. Thank you again for coming on, and all the best.
Thank you for calling me Mr. Dos Equis. Thank you all for listening.
And this is one more Aces track to take you out. This is Hurricane versus Beat Organ.